Hey, welcome to the Photo Flunky Show, episode 140. Today's topic, we want to talk about what's your most important lens. Hi, my name is William Beem.
Hi, my name is Lee Beem.
And we are here to help photographers become better visual storytellers so they can take better photos to share, sell, and remember. And it is October right now in beautiful Central Florida. And that means that it's blue sky and yet still raining.
Yes, and it's still summer.
But beside that little weather report, we just want to let you know that there's about three things that we want to look at with this episode is really how to evaluate your lens choices and how to use the lens choices to tell your story. The reason that we kind of want to go over this is to avoid lens lust and save some money. And I have to admit, I have given into this before. I'm guilty of going out and spending a lot of money on lenses because they were popular and other people said they were so great. And I thought, I have to have it. I must have it. But those are really what we're looking at is just really, can you evaluate a lens and decide this is a good value for you rather than I've just got money to burn and I'm going to spend it on a lens?
Yeah, I was a little different to you. I tried to see what I could make do with the lenses I had. You
were responsible. I wasn't. And that's kind of where the difference is you had responsibilities that I didn't. And I was just simply, I think I could go, spend $1,500, $2,000 or more on a lens. And I did. Mm-hmm. And they're still here. They're still wonderful. Do you like them?
I do like them.
But I don't know that I need all of the lenses that I have. I really use about two of them the most.
Yeah, that's true. I've used a few of your lenses, though.
Okay. So I guess where we want to start is, when do you know that you need another lens?
Well, when the one that you have stops you from achieving what you want to do. If it's not, if you go out on a wildlife safari and you're at a responsibly safe distance from where the animals are roaming.
Always be at least 1 mile from any animal.
You see some lions roaming around. Hopefully they are pretty far from where you are. Your little 18-55 or your wide angle fixed focus lens is really not going to cut it for you. You won't see the lion. That's one of the more extreme examples, but sometimes you need the ability to zoom in and get in really tight. Other times, you don't get the whole picture if it's not wide enough.
And that's really some of the issues that we're talking about. The other one that we kind of wanted to bring up was depth of field, and we're going to get into more detail of those three issues, but do you need something with a greater or wider focal length? Do you need a depth of field, or do you need an angle of view? And that's kind of like the wide angle that we were talking about versus a narrow angle with a telephoto lens. And in my case, I have gone off and bought lenses based upon reputation. So for example, I shoot Nikon, and the Nikon 85mm f1.4 lens has a really glorious reputation as a portrait lens. And I bought it. And it's not really one that I use that much. I'd like the shallow depth of field, but then I realized when I start doing this with portraits, if the subject turns his or her head just an inch or two the other way, one eye is in focus and the other eye is not. The depth of field is that shallow. And I thought, you know what? I've got to stop down from that f1.4 to get a good portrait. I might as well just be shooting with my 70-200 2.8.
See, I've bought one with a shallow depth of field. I just got a nifty 50, and the only reason I did that was because I could afford it and I needed something that let in more light for lighting situations that were not ideal. And that's really what I wanted. There was I didn't want to have to crank up my ISO beyond a certain point because I've got a low tolerance for noise. Some people are willing to forgive it at a much later stage. It was a bit of a trade-off for me, but I actually got it not for the depth of field to get, I wasn't looking for bokeh or anything. I just wanted something that I could use in lower light situations where I wasn't using a flash.
Which is also a really good idea, for getting those wide aperture lenses, so long as you know that the trade-off is, in some cases, that shallow depth of field. And depending on what you're shooting, that may or may not, make or break the photograph that you want to take. And also, I'm not going to disrespect the notion of, I bought this because I wanted it.
Yeah.
I've done that a number of times. I just did it, a couple of weeks ago. I bought an Apple Watch. I've never had one before. And Lee asked me, he said, well, why do you want it? I said, I just want a watch. And that's the one I decided I wanted.
Well, that to me is a justifiable reason to do something if you can.
Yeah. So lens lust can be, look, it can be a bad thing. It can lead you to buy something that you really don't need and ultimately find out that you don't want. But if you know what you want and you've already made those decisions and you just want it for the sake of wanting it and it's something you afford, we're not telling you that not to buy it. That's kind of not the purpose of this. This is really if you're evaluating a lens to understand what is it that it does for you and how well will it do it.
Here's something about getting a lens for the wrong reasons, or you buy a lens, for example, something that temporarily solves the situation that's not going to come up in your usual photos. When you've got that lens, you feel almost compelled to make it work for you. It's quite an interesting challenge. I've done this twice. I mean, I got the right lens to do the job I wanted, but once the task was finished or the trip was complete, I realized there's just nowhere that I can really use it. And then it became a challenge to see how I could find photos to take with that lens. And it honestly, it sent me on some adventures. I learned a lot. I also eventually learned that this is never going to be my lens. It was an absolutely great lens. I highly recommend it. Lucky to the thrilled person who bought it from me. But it didn't suit the type of photos that I was taking. And it also changed what I was doing by that stage.
You see, that's something that's happened to me as well. Is I've changed the type of photography that I do. I used to really enjoy doing a lot of travel photography. Now I'm really more interested in doing portraits. But for example, I wanted to get this, what was called the Nikon trilogy. And there's two of them, one for prime lenses and one for zoom lenses. So for the zoom lenses, there was a 70-200 on the long end. In the middle was a 24-70, which for me is my most used lens. It's the most practical one in most circumstances. And then there's also the 14-24, which is, ultra wide angle to 24 millimeter wide angle. I loved that as a travel lens, but at the same time, if I were someone doing landscapes, it would be completely impractical because you can't really put a filter on the front of it. It has this big kind of bubble front end element on it. Yeah. And it just does not really conform to putting a filter or a stack of filters on there if you want to do that. There are landscape photographers who said, you know what, instead of getting that 14-24, even though everybody loves it, a 16-35 is a much more practical lens because it still gives me a very wide angle at 16 millimeters. So 16 instead of 14, it's not that big of a deal to landscape. You can back up a couple inches and make up the difference in millimeters if you have to. And then you can also put filters on it. But the reason that I love this lens for travel was particularly for walking around. A few years ago, I had a chance to take a private tour of the United States Capitol and the Library of Congress. That was the only lens I used. It was perfect for gathering everything that was in there. It was something I could easily handhold and shoot because it's a short focal length. I didn't have that much worry about my camera hand shaking and blurring the lenses. There was a bit of distortion because of that kind of wide angle, but it was also easily correctable in Lightroom and with post-processing. And if all I did was walk around and do interior architecture, that would probably be very high on my list. As a portrait photographer, I hardly touch it anymore.
Yeah, well, wide angles are really not for portraits.
No, I mean, I see people doing that. I see people trying to take a 24 millimeter and take portraits of people, and they're getting right up in their face. They're that close, and they say, yeah, I can talk to my subject that way. You can, but you're not really making your subject look all that good. Yeah,
so they feel good when they get a picture taken, and they look and go, oh my goodness, I look like a fish.
Yeah, when you make your subject's hairline recede back a couple inches, what it looks like on their face, it's not really a wonderful thing. Now, this is kind of gets us into one of the things that people talk about. They talk about the compression you get with a telephoto lens. And I've said on a couple of previous episodes, compression is not a factor of focal length. And I guess this is a good enough time to say it. Compression is a matter of distance from your lens to the subject. So that same 24 millimeter lens, if you're right up against them, doesn't look very good. But you know what? If you take a few steps back and your subject is not so big on the frame, you're showing the environment. But then if you crop in post-processing and look at their photo, they don't have that distortion on them.
No, that's true.
So compression is really about the distance between your subject and the lens, not the focal length that you choose. Everybody thinks about it as terms of, you get great compression with a telephoto lens. And it seems that way, but also the minimum focusing distance on my 70 to 200 millimeter lens is 6 feet. You know, if I stand 6 feet back with my 24 millimeter and then crop in the result, I'll have a nice photo there too.
Mm-hmm.
I'll waste a lot of pixels, but I'll have a nice photo.
Yeah.
All right. So that's talking about travel and portraits, but that's not really what you do, Lee. What works for you?
I've actually almost evolved. I'd say maybe a half circle because I haven't done all kinds of photography, but I've certainly tried things out with them. I started out where I think when I got seriously into photography, I was looking for things. My favorite lens was actually my little cheap 50 millimeter lens. And I mean, it was one of the old ones that you had to like manually turn the range.
51.8.
Yeah.
A lot of people call that the nifty 50 because it's like $125, but it's really a very good lens.
Yeah, I think I paid less than $100 for mine. But you know, it was my favorite lens, and I'll tell you right off the bat, this lens, I like the 50 millimeter. To me, that's perfect. I know everyone says 35 is ideal. For me, I like to get in a little bit tighter. I really do fill my frame to my detriment sometimes because I don't leave room to crop or straighten. But instinctively, I fill my frame. So the 50 millimeter works fine for me. The downside and the trade-off there is that it is not a sharp lens. It is I found a little bit soft all the way through. Just not bad, but to me that was a bit of a trade-off. However, if you turn everything onto manual, because it does some things on auto with some of the camera bodies and other things it doesn't. And I found that if you do manual focus, it is better. That was the one that's kind of had me for a couple of years. And then I started going in, really using my photography for scrapbooking in a different way. And I was looking for details because I wanted backgrounds, I wanted little embellishments and things to put onto the pages. So for me, having a telephoto lens, something to 300, 70 to 300 was, that became my new best friend because it meant I didn't have to worry about somebody standing in my way, especially if I was shooting up or, shooting across something. I could get in really, really tight. That worked for me as well. Now I'm mostly using an iPhone. I do like William's 24 to 70. And
you like my 35.
And I do like your 35. I do crop quite a bit on the 35, but now that lens, unlike the 50, is so sharp all the way through that I can afford to crop. So I don't have a problem with it. And I think those are also things to consider. If your lens is sharp and you've got enough pixels and with the camera that you're taking, it's not a problem to actually just crop in after you've taken the photo. Whereas with the 50, not so easy.
You know what one of the differences with people talk about old school that zoom lenses never have the same optical quality as primes. And that's really changed a lot now. Zoom lenses these days are very, very good, but I noticed that the corners are still just a little bit softer than with a prime because you do have that changing, focal length and all those elements inside. Prime lenses don't have as many elements, so they can do better edge to edge and corner to corner to eliminate, some of that softness or maybe some of the little vignetting that happens. And I do like my primes, but I don't use them that much because they're not practical if I'm going to be out and I need different focal lengths. Changing lenses all the time is, quite honestly, it's annoying to me.
Oh, I see. I actually don't mind doing it.
I've gotten to the point where I can show up someplace. If it's going to be like a walk around day, a street photography day, 24 to 70 for me is perfect. I don't want to carry a bag. I don't want to lug a bunch of other stuff around with me. I just want to have a strap, my camera, and the one lens, and that works for me very, very well. But that's a matter of preference, and that's kind of why you would choose a lens. I know people who could walk around with just a 35 millimeter lens and do all their street photography with that and come up with some very wonderful photos. The lens you choose is really going to depend upon the way you want to do your photography.
That's true. And sometimes it's just a fun choice. I mean, I used to do that quite often when we were on vacation. I'd think, okay, we've been here for so many days. What lens am I going to do? And then I thought, I don't really want to think about this. I'd look around and think, okay, that's it for today. And sometimes I had no zoom option. And it was quite fun trying to figure out different ways to take a photo to what I would instinctively do. It made me think more about what I was doing. It made me move differently. I think I learned a lot through doing that and I had some fun with it. Now, if your photos are really important to you and you have to get those shots, then don't do that on a day like
Well,
that.
and that's kind of where we come back to the topic title was, what's your most important lens? And it really comes down to, are you looking for something where you have to get something done for a job? Or are you looking at something, this is my most creative lens? I know people have fun with a fisheye. They do some very creative work.
Oh, yeah.
We had a great time shooting fisheye photos, but I don't think I could do fisheye photos for everything that I do.
Not for everything, but that 10.5, I shall cover that until the end of my time on the earth. I absolutely love that lens, and I'm not a wide angle person. I've never really been able to find ways to use a wide angle lens, but that fisheye, I use the hell out of it.
And there are other lenses that are kind of creative. Lens Baby has some, or a tilt shift lens, that just put a very different spin on the way you would capture something. And that might be the difference between having a photo that you really like or one that said, okay, I've seen that elsewhere before.
I never got into the tilt shift stuff.
I haven't tried it as a tilt shift lens. I've done it in post-processing to kind of give that look. And sometimes it's interesting, but it's not really a style that I've adopted for myself. But yet I know people who do it and use it in portrait photography and get some interesting looks. As long as your model doesn't mind being, made to look like a toy.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. Just maybe I don't understand it enough.
But that's okay. They're creative choices. I mean, a tilt shift for architecture is, per perspective correction, and it'll handle all those problems. It has a very logical purpose, but you don't have to shoot architecture with it. You can do some creative things with it completely outside of its intended purpose when it was designed.
I get that it's fun, and I just thought that it serves a purpose in architecture. Anyway, that was just a little thing I threw in there because when you mentioned it, I thought, that one never caught on with me.
One of the things I'm looking at a lens more these days is kind of the angle of view that I'm getting. In other words, am I looking at a wide angle or telephoto? And that's probably one of the most common things that people think about. I guess you think about focal length, like, do I need a 200 millimeter or do I need a 24 millimeter? But what you're really doing is you're choosing the angle of view, and that lets you decide how much of the environment you're going to bring in or leave out of your photo. And also it kind of helps you decide how close are you going to get to your subject. So we were talking about wildlife, which I am not a wildlife photographer, but I would not take a 24 millimeter to go on a lion safari.
No, that just leaves too much at risk.
It's like, yes, I'm close enough to talk to the lion, but then again, the lion is also close enough to bite my head off.
Yeah, that's not going to work for me. And take the lens with it. But don't you, you get some kind of distortion at either extreme. So when you're going, whether you're going very wide or whether you're going...
Well, again, that kind of depends upon how far away your lens is to the subject. And people make this mistake commonly. They'll get a wide angle lens and they'll get really close to their subject because they want to fill the frame with it. And then, it bows and it's got that kind of curvature in what should be straight lines. You back that thing off and 24 millimeter can look really nice in some cases. Or if you're trying to take in a whole cityscape, you might find out on the end, the buildings are leaning in at like a 30-degree angle on each side.
Sometimes you want that, though. I had a lot of fun playing with the fisheye like that. I quite enjoyed that. And with my mother, I had a Tokina 11 to 16 millimeter wide angle. I loved that lens. But I couldn't make it work for me outside of the trip that I took, that I bought it for.
Some of these lenses, you can still capture what you want, but you have to realize if you want the results to look, straight up as you saw it, you can fix that in post-processing, but you're going to lose some of the stuff on the edges.
Yeah.
And I've got a YouTube video on that. I'll put that in the show notes. It's completely possible to really fix the architecture, if that's what you're shooting, or a cityscape, or whatever it may be, in post-processing. But you have to keep in mind that is extra work, and you're not going to get the full frame in the result.
That's true, because it's going to crop it. Anyways, what I was saying about the distortion is that it actually forces you to pick a certain distance from your subject, depending on the style that you have. So what I was saying is you're going to have some trade-off of distortion. You get a wide angle and you like to fill the frame. You've got to accept that distortion is going to be part of your picture. Is it part of the creative story that you're telling? Does this work with what you're using it for? If you like your wide angle because you like to be a little bit further away and you like to get more, of the scene in, then that's a different story. So that's all I'm saying is with the distortion, there is some on either end. That was my understanding anyways, but it's going to be there more for some people than for others, depending on how you compose your photos and what your style is.
Honestly, I expect distortion with pretty much every lens. I think we say that the 50 millimeter is closest to the field of view of a human eye, which is why I avoid it. I don't want things to look normal. I want things to look either better than normal or weirder than normal. But to me, that is something that makes a photo more interesting than just something you see every day.
Okay.
So we talk about wide angle distortion. Yeah, that's very obvious and see it. But when you also put a telephoto on, you're distorting things as well, and you're excluding part of what you would normally see. And let's say that part of what we talk about with compression is subject is in one place, and maybe there's a door or a tree or something behind your subject, that one of the 200 millimeter lens comes much, much closer in the final frame than what it truly is. Mm-hmm. You don't just affect things from side to side. You can also affect them in how they appear in the depth of the photo. That's
true. Yeah, like that photo you took of the trees.
Yeah, and I was at Wormslow Estate just outside of Savannah, and it's called Oak Avenue, I think, which is funny because I grew up on Oak Island Road, but that's near here in Northern Area. Anyways, the trees are spaced evenly on either side, and when you stand there, they look rather far apart. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I was taking photos with my 24-70, and I'm thinking, these photos just don't look good to me. They look like, what I'm seeing here, and it's not what I expected. I actually packed up and left, and then before I got down to the end of the road, I said, wait a minute, I can fix this. I went back and I put my 70-200 on the tripod, and I zoomed in, and suddenly all those trees came together, and the resulting photo looked much thicker, much more lush than what you really see when you're driving down the road. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was a better photo. It's not realistic. It's distorted.
Yeah.
But it was a distortion that I liked.
Yes.
And that was really kind of the story I wanted to tell was,
lots of trees.
Lots of trees. You're surrounded by the trees. And that's why I look at these lenses as, how can they help me tell the story that I want to tell? And you don't always think of it as a story, but I'm kind of getting to the point where now I do. And that was kind of an example before I thought of it as storytelling, is this is the photo I wanted. Why? And it's because of the feeling that I wanted someone to get when they look at it, that you're surrounded by trees.
Yeah.
So your lenses are storytelling tools. And the one that's really the most important to you is the one that helps you tell the story that you need to tell at that moment. And you can go and do like I did, buy a whole bunch of lenses that you really never use. But if you think about the story that you want to tell and the resulting photo that you want to get, that will help you decide what's really worth your while and where you can spend your money. And you know what? If you don't want to use it all the time, that's great too. That's why we have some lovely little lens rental places to deal with.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, because we had some friends who ran a business here in Orlando area at Magic Kingdom, and they did a lens rental business.
Yes.
Hi, Lenice, in case you're listening.
Kingdom Camera Rentals.
Camera Rentals, and they would bring it to you at Disney World.
That was just like the most fabulous service.
And there are other places that can help you out. Sometimes the storytelling lens you need isn't necessarily one you have to buy, but if you know you need it, go out and get a rental. And then, even before you buy it, sometimes it's really worth your while to go rent a lens.
Yeah.
Check it out, try it, see if it does what you think it will do and how often you're going to use it. And then you might save yourself some money just renting it once in a while instead of spending money on something that you'll only use every once in a while.
That's true. Yes.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Photo Funky Show. Show notes are going to be available at williambeam.com/episode 140. And of course, we would love it if you would subscribe to the show. If you're able and you're on your mobile device right now, please go ahead and subscribe. If not, you'll find links at the show notes to subscribe, or you can just go to williambeam.com/iTunes and it will take you to the iTunes page or Apple Podcast page to subscribe to the show. That way you find it in your little device player. Every Wednesday at 10 o'clock, we release a new episode, and hopefully not long after that, iTunes will deliver it to you. Thank you so much. We'll see you again next week.